Hello, say Charat. Imagine an average-sized adult with black hair and brown eyes. Now, imagine that this person wants to be taller and have red hair and blue eyes, but without any surgery, any hair dye, or any contact lenses. This person may try all types of techniques, but no matter how good the techniques are, none of them will be enough to be achieving those goals. The height, the hair color, and the eye tone were fundamentally defined by genetics. And there is nothing that we can do to change that without external resources, devices. We all know that. And that is why we're capable of accepting certain limitations when we are facing a characteristic defined by genetics. So in other words, we know that it is not efficient to search for techniques that will change or promise to change what can't be changed. However, in relation to happiness, there is an important difference that exists that you need to understand. It is very common to search for psychological techniques, mindset change, and even focusing techniques to see if we can increase our levels of happiness. But what if happiness is genetic as well? What if our average level of happiness is determined in good part by our genes? What could we do about it? Science shows us that a good part of our happiness is defined by genetics and cannot be changed. In 2016, for the first time in history, a group of scientists managed to isolate parts of the human genome that can explain the different forms that people experience happiness. And after analyzing more than 300,000 DNA samples, the scientists concluded that a certain level of happiness is linked to your genetics, and it is basically impossible to modify these genes to improve your level of happiness. And this argument is reinforced by research that investigated twins with identical genes that had been separated at birth. And the study noted that even though they grew up in different environments, several twins had similar levels of happiness, of well-being. It is as if each person in the world has a baseline for happiness, a minimum level of satisfaction with life that is determined by genetics and that maintains itself consistently throughout the years. And even if genetic engineering one day reaches a high level of sophistication, there are thousands of variables in the genes that can influence happiness. So changing your average level of happiness by altering your DNA probably is not a very viable alternative. So what can we do? Should we accept the happiness levels that we got in the genetic lottery? Or can we explore other ways of being happier? Not all of your happiness is defined by your genetics. Your attitudes influence as much as your genes. There is a connection between your genes and your level of happiness. However, external factors can influence how your genes manifest. Depending on how your mentality is, or your attitudes, or where you live, your average level of happiness can change. Genetics can determine a range, a spectrum of happiness that is natural to you, but you can influence where exactly in this range of happiness you will be positioned. Let's make an analogy here. Imagine a person that has the genetic tendency for obesity. These genes determine that this person is unlikely to be naturally very thin, but still this person is concerned with having a mentality of being focused on their own health, with having the attitude of watching their own food and practicing physical exercises and resting well. So even though that person is still overweight for what could be considered average in the society, this person managed through their own attitudes to not be obese. Inside that range that was already predetermined by genetics, that person was able to make the best out of it. With happiness, you can do the same. Even though genetically you might not be predisposed to be super happy all the time, you can have thoughts and actions that will improve your average level of well-being. Positive psychology is the most secure path to increase your happiness with support of science. Psychologist Tal Ben-Shahar spent his life studying what makes people happy. And he claims that half of your happiness is determined by genetics. 40% of your happiness is determined by your personal choices. And the other 10% of your happiness is determined by the environment where you live in. That means you can influence about half of your average level of happiness. Now the problem is that there are supposedly thousands of different products and techniques to make you happier. You can search the internet or visit a bookstore, just ask anybody. In every corner you will find techniques and tips and hacks to increase your happiness. How much of it works? How much of it is speculation without evidence? Well, it's hard to say. Therefore, the best path for you to raise your standard level of happiness is to seek scientifically proven ways to increase your well-being. And a good part of these techniques are studied by a branch of psychology known as positive psychology. Positive psychology studies what makes life worth it. Positive psychology teaches techniques that help us to develop a positive mental state, living more fulfilling lives and with greater happiness. Nowadays, it is possible to speak without shadow of doubt that positive psychology is as important as the traditional focus on psychology on repairing weaknesses or curing pathologies. When you seek a positive way of living with a happy mentality and focus on happiness, you are at the same time preventing your mental health from deteriorating, avoiding ills like burnout, panic, and depression. Unfortunately, all the psychology of the last half of the 20th century was concentrated on diseases, disorders, and on the negative side of life. But this started to change in the last decades, and you can take advantage of this movement to improve your well-being. Now, you don't have to be held hostage to your genetics. You can use the resources that you have at your fingertips to be happier. Now, let's go back to the example from the beginning of our conversation, the example of the average-sized adult with black hair and brown eyes. This person wants to be taller and have red hair and blue eyes, but they can't totally change that naturally, at least, because all of this has already been determined by genetics. So what is left for that person to do? Well, first of all, they could change their expectations, right? They could also use some external resources to change what they want to modify. That person could use high heels to feel taller, could dye their hair red, and could use contact lenses to have the blue eyes. Likewise, you can also use all the resources that you have at your fingertips to overcome the genetic limitations and increase your standard level of happiness. There are dozens of techniques for you to feel happier. Techniques that use everything from a change of an internal mentality to the use of external devices to change your state of mind and make you feel better. It is worth testing everything that has already been proven by science. By taking advantage of what has an effect on your happiness and discarding what doesn't, then you will be able to impact your standard levels of happiness by up to 50%. Good part of your happiness is defined by genetics, and there isn't much that you can do about that. And at the same time, another great part of your standard level of happiness is determined by your personal choices and by the environment in which you live. If you're able to impact up to 50% your levels of happiness with the use of techniques that are proven by science, well, there is no reason to do nothing at all, as if you would be a hostage of genetics. For you who wants to get in action right now and get to know the best techniques from positive psychology, I invite you now to get to know the Happiness Project by Arata Academy by accessing arata.se/happiness.